Well, okay, like David, he had asthma. He has to take responsibility for having asthma. Look, as far as illness, there's predisposition, precipitation, and prolongation. It starts at some point, it enters into you, and then you keep it up over a long period of time. But you keep it up over a long period of time. I'll give you an example. Person says, if you only knew what my father did to me, and their father's been dead for 20 years, and you say to the person, it ain't going to happen this way, but you say, look, is he doing it now? Many people have things happen to them, and they could end it right spot, but they keep it up themselves. Do you follow me on that, or is that
absolutely? Yeah, that makes absolute sense.
And I'm telling you, this is a powerful way to think, because if you were to discard all these negative happenstances in your life and start fresh and realize that you've been keeping it going, not the person. They're dead, or maybe they're not around you anymore. I'll give you an example. Look, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I ended up working for my dad in his insurance brokerage for a while. I did other things, but that was one of them. And one day he said to me, look, you could never make it selling insurance. That pissed me off so bad, I quit that day and left and got another job. About 12 years later, I was selling life insurance for Mutual of New York, Mony, Money. I got my picture in Newsweek magazine twice in 1 year as being the man of the month in money. And I did it to make my father wrong. But my father was dead.
That's a good point, though. It's kind of like whatever locks you in a prison, whatever situation, person locks you into prison, you hold the keys to that prison, but you don't make that connection.
My friend, you said a mouthful. As a matter of fact,
I usually do.
We could end the show right there. That would be it.
Good night, all. Thank you for joining us. No, I'm kidding.
No shit. I mean, you're one of the smartest interviewers that ever said that. The other two of you,
oh man,
I don't know.
Wow.
We'll have our time. We'll have our time. I got some questions too. Don't worry.
Listen, as a little aside, people who fool themselves. I had a friend, Vic Wallace, wonderful guy, but he used to say to me, Ronnie, if my face was different and I lost 40 pounds, just like Rod Steiger.
That's good.
Well, look, if my face was different, I'd look just like, I don't know who. Anyway, go on.
For 82, your face looks fantastic. So I'll keep it just the way that it is right now. So, all right. So when David, following his the cure of his asthma, and you guys are all in, your family's all in. What situation and events took place that kind of catapulted David into where he would eventually become the leader of Scientology and where he is now?
That's a good question, and I'm going to answer that. Let me just get a drink of water here.
Oh, sure. Not a problem.
No. I came home from work one night, and David was 15 years old, going to be 16 shortly. And he's laying in his room. And I looked and I said, what's up, Dave? And he's laying back in bed with his hands behind his head. And he says, Dad, I don't want to go to school anymore. I said, what do you mean? He says, look, the kids don't want to learn. They don't listen to the teacher. Almost all of them are smoking pot or taking drugs. He says, I want to go and help L. Ron Hubbard. He says, yeah, that's what I really want to do. Now, he's 15. He's going to be 16 shortly. And I thought to myself, well, I was 17 and I joined the Marines, and my dad thought I was nuts. But that was one of the most most fruitful things I've ever done. If he wants to go and help Ron Hubbard, and he's already a trained auditor or a trained counselor, I thought, you know what? I says, Dave, I'll help you. I'll do whatever I can to help you. So on his 16th birthday, I took him to Philadelphia. I bought him a plane ticket. I bought him clothes. I gave him money. Right on the day after his birthday, which is April 30th, he got on a plane and flew down to Florida. Now, within 7 months, he was working with L. Ron Hubbard. Throughout those years of working with him, he worked himself into a position where he was the communication line between L. Ron Hubbard and the rest of Scientology. Because, L. Ron Hubbard was in hiding most of the time in those years. Mm-hmm. He was running away from the law, okay? So that in itself is a position of power where you are the one who receives any communication going to the head of an organization and also being the only one who lets out what comes from the head of the organization to the rest of Scientology. Having said that, follow this. Now, L. Ron Hubbard died. Here's what David did, and I'll tell you what made him do this. Prior to this, he did have a severe asthmatic attack, and he went to the emergency room. And they fixed him up. And when he came out, he was picked up by a friend of mine and said, here's what David said to me. David said, I just had a realization, and that is this. Power is not granted, it is assumed. So what he did when L. Ron Hubbard died is he assumed the leadership of the entire church, took people off who would oppose him, put in his own people, and said, I'm the boss. In other words, it was a coup. This is not unusual, or as a matter of fact, I'm sure it goes on all the time across the world. But that's what he did, and that's how he came to be the leader of the church. And then he took out the highest organization within the church, which is the Religious Technology Center, and put his own people in there. And as a matter of fact, on an upcoming interview, not this Sunday, the following one, I have Jesse Prince coming on, and he was in the Religious Technology Center that David took apart and put his own people in. The Religious Technology Center would be like the Gestapo for Hitler, okay? They're the top dogs. They're the police force.
What was gonna be L. Ron Hubbard's contingency plan? Like, did he have a plan in place for when he died? Who would succeed him? Or, okay, so it was just kind of scramble for the top.
Yep, no plan at all. There was a guy and his wife, Pat and Nanny Broker, who worked for him, and a lot of people would assume that they would hold the leadership of it. And when L. Ron Hubbard died, many people thought he would take over, but that never came to fruition. And David was more powerful than him as far as an individual is concerned. And that's how he took over the church. It is literally that simple. And what really gave him power was in the early 90s, he achieved tax deduction for the church and got it named as a religion from the IRS. Having done that, he was then looked upon as the savior. Right. That power that began at that point, that's where I think he started changing. All right. When you get that much power, just like Lord Acton says, power has a tendency to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Makes sense. Before we jump into what finally made you leave, Casey or Steve, Casey, did you have a question that you wanted to pop in about this particular aspect of his life?
Not specifically. The book has like a even more detailed timeline, and seriously, if you haven't read Ruthless, you have to. It's a fascinating story, heartbreaking but fascinating, but I do want to ask, the Church of Scientology used to have tax exemption, and they lost it, right, because of L. Ron Hubbard and tax problems?
Early on.
Is that right?
In the early years, yeah. But this was for real. And the way it was pulled off was David got tons of people to file suit against the IRS. I don't know, maybe hundreds of suits. And the IRS did not have to handle this many lawsuits. And they were walking out of the office one day. I forget who was the person who said this to Abe Goldberg. He says, if you grant a tax exemption, Dave can call off all the suits. And Abe said, are you serious? And that was the beginning of the crack in the wall, and that brought down the temple. At that point, they figured, screw it. let's just end it. We'll give him tax deduction of religion. But I'm telling you, that was a critical point of him starting as chief power. And it's changed, and it's today, it is not at all like when I joined in 1970. In those days, it was like freewheeling. It was a good time. Your friends were around, and just, well, I guess maybe at
something
the beginning
dark
of
now.
just about it. It's very dark. It's a grim life, I got to tell you guys. I mean, the reason we escaped, you want to know why?
Absolutely.
I just couldn't take living that way anymore. And I described the escape in the book, and if you've read it, Kathy, you know what I'm talking about. We planned that escape for 6 months. We planned it for 6 months, and even the night before we were going, I'm putting in a mesh bag full of shoes, like these bags that you can see through the holes and everything. And the security guard is standing right next to me, watching me put these shoes in my car, and doesn't say anything, because my biggest cover was this. I was 76 years old, and I was the father of the chairman of the board. Nobody would expect that I was going to leave unauthorized. The next morning, we wake up. We're driving down to the gate where I'm going to go out of, and I already, for about, months, I would drive across on Sunday morning, go to the studio where I had a refrigerator, and I would Italian salami or maybe Parmesan cheese, and I'd come through the other gate and feed the security guards some of this. So I was like feeding the watchdogs, So the morning we're going to go, I go to this remote gate. I press the button. They didn't say anything. They opened the gate. I said to my wife, we're turning left. I jumped on the gas pedal about a mile down the road. You could either go straight, turn right, or turn left and go into town. I knew that the guy chasing me would not think I turned left. So I turned left, went into town, and we were free. But detail in the book, and truthfully, sometimes I'll reread the book just to freshen myself up on it, and I'd say to myself, Jesus Christ, I can't even believe we did this.
What would have happened if they caught up to you, if you didn't take, what would have happened to you?
They would have seized us physically. We would have been separated from each other, and we would have been interrogated every day, and in between the interrogations, we would do manual labor, like pulling weeds or maybe digging ditches and stuff like that. And then it would try to work both ends to the other, and they would come to me and say, well, Becky says she's sorry, she wants to stay. They'd go to Becky and say, well, Ron's sorry, he would stay. And it would have been a miserable fucking life.
You mean they kidnap you?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they would do.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell a little bit of the story about what happened after you left? And because it's a really interesting story about how he had you followed and stuff like that.
Okay. And remember, folks, you're watching me get interviewed. Remember my website, therealronmiscavige.com, and you can see me interview other people, and they'll tell you stories similar to mine. So you'll see that this is not like unique. This is common to what I'm, not exactly what I did, but what happens to people. So I leave. March 25th, 2012. About a year and 3 months later, living here in West Dallas, which is a town right on the border of Milwaukee. And there's a guy around the corner from my house looking at a house that's for sale. This is in the evening. And a lady sees this guy, and she calls the cops and says, listen, there's a guy out here. He's looking in his house. He could be a drug dealer. So Nick Pye from the West Dallas police came down. And he said to the guy, look, what are you doing? And the guy said, well, I'm looking at the house. Am I breaking the law? And he started giving Nick a bunch of shit. So Nick, who is built like a linebacker and looks like he can bench press 400 pounds, which he can, by the way, said to the guy, you know what? You're under arrest. Can I look in your trunk? He looked in the trunk, and in the trunk, there was 5 license plates from different states, 5 handguns, a stun gun, 2 rifles, 1 with a silencer, and 2,000 rounds of ammunition. That was it. They busted the guy that took him in. They found out him, Dwayne Powell, and his son, Daniel Powell, private investigator, were being paid $10,000 a week to follow me and report on my every day between 8 in the morning and 8 o'clock at night. And there was an incident that happened in a little town called Janesville,